A Navy launch cuts through Tokyo Bay on 29 August 1945, its bow light painting the fences of Omori as American sailors and Marines jump to the pier with M1 Garands and medical kits. Two skeletal Americans, Leon S. Johnston of Atlanta and Harry R. Sanders of Terre Haute, blink into the beams and realize the guard with the rifle is saluting them. A loud American voice reads an order that sounds like science fiction. The senior POW is now in command. Prisoners will receive the best rations available. Medical treatment starts now. Evacuation as soon as possible. The order is real, and it spreads like fire through the camps as parachutes begin to drift from the Night B 29 seconds, and transports dumping food and penicillin on places where men once hid crumbs in their boots. The relief and recovery of Allied prisoners of war and civilian internees will be accomplished with all possible speed. The paper says. And the guards don't argue because the war is over and the Americans brought the future with them. Crates split open to reveal cans of meat, milk powder, bandages, sulfur, chocolate, and cigarettes. Starving men cheer and cry even before they eat. Fleet units of the U.S. Third Fleet stand off as floating hospitals. Air-sea rescue stations mark routes like dotted lifelines from the Marianas and Okinawa to Honshu. In days, American airmen and sailors hit 158 camps and drop 4,470 tons of supplies. The sound of a B-29 is now the sound of breakfast. A British POW hauls up a sheet scrawled with "Thanks Yanks" in lampblack, while a Navy corpsman checks pulses and says, "Eat first, talk later." Japanese staff look stunned as the command flips without a shot, and the senior POW assigns work details: wood for heat, water for the sick, guards to carry stretchers because rank has a new meaning today. In the first weeks, Americans turn bombers into mercy ships and enemy ports into triage hubs without pausing to count the cost. A Dutch survivor whispers, "You found us." And the answer is visible in the sky. More chutes, more crates, more planes. The smell of rice and coffee mixes with tidewater and iodine. Slowly, men who had forgotten how to stand begin to stand. Johnston watches his watch stopped for months and hears it tick again in his head, timing a nation that runs on schedules and promises kept. The bridge to tomorrow is already built. Recovery teams are forming, trains are being reserved, and every camp will feel the same shock, because that is what Americans do when they say they will. A B-29 superfortress arcs over Shinagawa at low altitude, bomb bay doors yawning, not for fire but flower, not for death but life. Parachutes blossom white against the ash-grey city as aircrews from the 20th Air Force and 5th Air Force hit coordinates that yesterday marked targets and today are salvation. Below, Navy hospital teams stand topside with litters, ready to shuttle the worst cases to surgical wards. Ashore, 8th Army medics open crates, with crowbars and rations with knives, measuring calories like artillery shells, precise and life-saving. Admiral William F. Halsey's Third Fleet anchors in Tokyo Bay with doctors, corpsmen, and stocks of clothing enough to outfit thousands. Deck cranes swing pallets into barges while MPs clear lanes on shore. The soundscape flips. Where sirens once warned of raids, now loudhailers call out names on manifests and tell men to get ready to eat more than they can hold. A prisoner from Wake Island raises a tin of milk and laughs for the first time in years. A New Zealander checks the label on a chocolate bar and says he's going to keep the wrapper forever. American recovery teams in olive drab vests spread out like fire brigades over 70 specialized teams with Allied liaisons tasked to find, list, treat, clothe, and move everyone. In just 3 weeks, they process 32,624 POWs for evacuation and onward movement, a number so clean it feels like a factory output. Locate, treat, feed, ship. A Navy coxswain ferries a stretcher to a hospital ship and tells the patient, "You're next," the two best words a man can hear when he has waited through 3 monsoons. The guards who used to decide everything now carry blankets and latrine buckets under orders from men they once beat, and the shock on their faces says the empire inside their heads has fallen too. 4,470 tons to 158 camps is not just generous, it is industrial-scale kindness delivered with bomber precision. We thought the planes would never stop. A British corporal croaks, his voice dry from the first real meal. The B-29 seconds bank toward the sea and keep coming, timed like trains, dropping packets that crack open and turn into soup, bread, and hope. The bridge ahead is bigger than any beachhead. Ports, railheads, quarantine lines, and reception centers that will push an entire region's worth of captives and civilians toward home. The Americans have shown they can feed a city from the air. Next, they will move one across the water. Could anyone keep a plague from following victory into port? That was the fear at Uraga, when ships packed with repatriates arrived during a cholera flare, with some runs counting more than 20 ships and tens of thousands of souls at anchor. American public health officers and Navy doctors made a hard call that showed what discipline looks like under mercy. Hold the ships offshore, treat the sick afloat, feed everyone on schedule, and do not let disease onto rail platforms. Reception centers Hakata, Hakodate, Kagoshima, Kure, Maizuru, Nagoya, Sasebo, Senzaki, Tanabe, Uraga ran like a single machine backed by U.S. rations, Japanese labor under SCAP orders, and military police who could be firm and kind at the same time. In May 1946 alone, the system routed rail for roughly 550,000 people in 3 weeks. The whistles did not stop, and the timetables were gospel. On the pier, a Japanese mother presses her palm to a porthole, while a Navy doctor, eyes sleeves rolled, says, "Tomorrow, after quarantine," and she nods, because the rules are for everyone's children. An American lieutenant ticks boxes on a clipboard, while a translator reads instructions into a megaphone. Step here, water there, clinic next, food last. It feels like an assembly line, because safety at scale must. Men who arrived with fevers leave with blankets and tags. Families count heads. MPs smile and point, and no one is left behind. A Korean grandmother shuffles down a gangway, clutching a voucher for rice, and a GI walks beside her without touching because respect is part of the plan. The docks smell like disinfectant, wet rope, coal smoke, and something sweeter soup from field kitchens ladled into bowls that clatter on folding tables. The Americans ran quarantine, feeding, and rail movement without stopping the flow, a feat that reads like myth until you see the timetables and hear the train brakes squeal. "We thought we'd die in the harbour," a repatriate says, "but they kept order, and we lived," a sentence that could be written on the hull of every ship that waited its turn. Officers brief civilian doctors, MPs brief stevedores, and the line moves again, faster, safer, tighter. The bridge forward leads to a darker test. Not everyone stepping onto the pier is simply hungry or sick. Some come back from Soviet camps singing a different anthem. The Americans will need more than food to meet that threat. They will need moral clarity and the will to protect choice. The trains from the north bring men who sing the Internationale and wave red flags from windows, and families on the platform freeze because their sons' faces are the same but their eyes are not. Newspapers ask, "What did they do to our boys?" And the words that come back are chilling. Indoctrination, control, leaders who tell stretcher cases to refuse treatment for the sake of the group. American MPs watch, not unkind, and refuse to force anyone back into any ideology. They screen, they brief, they offer routes home, and they protect the platforms from chaos. Some repatriates whisper to an MP, "If you send me back, I disappear," words that need no translation, and the answer is steady. You choose your path here. The occupation's law is simple and American to the core. No coerced returns, orderly processing, food for all, and a train ticket that leads forward, not back. The repatriation wave from Soviet-controlled regions reached into the millions, with records counting about 1.6 million from those areas alone, and the system absorbed them without breaking. A Japanese editor writes that men have lost individuality and family feeling under that training, and the sentence lands like a punch because it describes a theft of the soul. American officers answer theft with abundance and clarity. Clinics open, housing is assigned, and the line keeps moving, all under the same rules posted at every reception gate. A young woman bows to a Navy doctor and says, "Arigato." Simple and exact. While behind her a former soldier stares at a map of routes and understands that choice is the new power. The bridge to the next phase gleams like a convoy at night. Ships and trains and schedules at an American rhythm that turns fear into timetables and timetables into freedom. Imagine counting vessels instead of shells. 188 Japanese ships placed under SCAP control, with space for roughly 200,000 passengers, plus 191 US-owned ships adding another tilde, 334,000 inches lift, all moving like boxcars on water. Routes stretch from Burma to Melbourne to Hawaii and back to the home islands, and manifests reared like family trees, miners, farmers, nurses, labourers, soldiers, widows, children. The official term calls it a waterborne migration without parallel in history, and the numbers prove it every sunrise when another convoy noses into a reception port and tugs begin their dance. Negligible loss of life is the phrase the reports use, a quiet miracle made of discipline and fuel, and you can track the miracle by the smell of bunker oil, boiled rice, and deck paint. Americans love machines that do good work, and these ships are machines of mercy backed by ledgers, checklists, and men who measure success in human beings delivered alive. On deck, a GI in a life vest points to a row of blankets and says in slow Japanese, "Warm, sit, wait," 3 words that build trust better than speeches. Stevedores rig gangways. A Navy signalman flashes a lamp. A harbour pilot swings a freighter onto the line. It all feels like a drill because repetition is safety. A Korean child wraps both hands around a tin cup of soup and blows. A British ex-POW touches the rail and names every port he can still remember. Then cries because he can't. The enemy watches and understands a new kind of power. Not terror, not speed of destruction, but speed of care at continental scale. The bridge to the finish is near, the tally sheets are almost complete, the last hard cases are known by name, and a nation that fights like a storm can also count like an accountant until the last person is home. This is the payoff that sounds impossible until you see it stacked in black and white. By 31 December 1946, roughly 5,103,300 Japanese were home, and those who wanted evacuation under the program got it, while the remaining holdouts were either still captive abroad or in special processing. Add the earlier weeks that stunned the world. 4,470 tons of supplies dropped to 158 camps, hospital ships waiting, air-sea rescue chains strung from the Marianas and Okinawa, over 70 recovery teams pushing through rail yards, and 32,624 POWs processed in 3 weeks at the start. The engines of mercy were American, B-29 seconds that once burned cities now feeding them, LSTs and Liberty ships, hauling families instead of tanks, MPs and medics working side by side under a simple oath. Get them home. Quotes still echo. The relief and recovery will be accomplished with all possible speed. We thought we'd die in the harbour. You found us. 3 sentences that chart the arc from terror to trust. The air smells different when a port finally empties. Salt and diesel give way to laundry and cooking fires. And the docks grow quiet because that is what success sounds like. The occupation moved more people safely in 2 years than some nations move by migration in a decade, while keeping order, preventing epidemics, and rebuilding local government. The enemy's shock has a new face now, former adversaries looking at trains that run on time and clinics that open on schedule, and realizing this is what a free, organized people can do. A Japanese father bows to an American MP and says, You gave us back our family. And the MP shrugs, because in America, that kind of miracle is supposed to be normal. The last pages of the ledger close with hard names and hard numbers, but the feeling is simple. Power used like this makes friends out of history. The story binds shut with a click. You can almost hear a nation that won the war by overwhelming force, then won the peace by overwhelming care, and the clocks on 1,000 wrists started ticking again because America kept time for everyone. A staff car rolls through the gate at Omori in the noon heat, and the American officer in the front seat tells the NCO beside him, "Read it loud." The paper in his hand is blunt and world-turning. The senior POW is now in command. Prisoners will be fed on the highest local ration scale. The best available medical care begins at once. Evacuation follows as fast as transport arrives. Guards who once barked orders now carry stretchers because the directive says so, and the men behind it have 29 seconds, LSTs, and an entire fleet to enforce mercy. The camp's worst rooms open first, the punishment cells at Ofuna, the bunks where men lay with beriberi and malaria, and corpsmen move in with sulfur, dressings, and a simple line, "You are going home." The shock is inside the numbers too. Omori and Shinagawa had been called abominable. Ofuna, the Gestapo center of Japan. Now a senior prisoner assigns work details, requisitions, food, and signs for supplies under American authority. Leon S. Johnston of Atlanta and Harry R. Sanders of Terre Haute step forward in sunlight, bones sharp under striped shirts, and salute because discipline feels holy when it saves lives. A British POW grips a crate of milk powder like treasure, while a Dutch sergeant laughs at a bar of chocolate and the paper wrapper he'll keep forever. The Third Fleet rides the horizon like a hospital district. Air-sea rescue chains tie the Marianas and Okinawa to Honshu. Every roar overhead means more food on the ground. A Japanese orderly watches the switch and understands a truth he cannot say out loud. The empire lost because another nation could move help faster than his could move hurt. The bridge ahead is bigger than any battle plan ports, reception centers, and rail timetables that will turn this command flip into a continental homecoming. A harbor pilot at Maizuru leans into the wheel and slides a freighter into position as tugs chatter on the lines and whistles answer along the quay. Gangways go up like drawbridges in reverse. Stevedores chalk numbers on crates. Navy signal lamps wink to hospital ships anchored beyond the breakwater. The lift is staggering and precise. 188 Japanese ships placed under SCAP control with space for about 200,000 passengers, plus 191 U.S. owned ships, adding roughly 334,000 more. Manifests thump onto clipboards, and entire decks empty in minutes. Reception centers ring the map: Hakata, Hakodate, Kagoshima, Kure, Maizuru, Nagoya, Sasebo, Senzaki, Tanabe, Uraga, each with the same rhythm: health check, hot food, onward rail, warm, sit. Wait, a GI says in careful Japanese, pointing to blankets stacked like sandbags. Kindness is standard operating procedure, and the line moves, because order is mercy at scale. A Korean grandmother cups a tin of soup with both hands. A Filipino civilian internee stares at his rail voucher as if it might vanish. A New Zealander, who last ate standing up, sinks to a bench and cries. The smells are coal smoke, disinfectant, boiled rice, and deck paint. The sounds are gulls, loudhailers, and boots on plank steps. Negligible loss of life becomes a lived thing you can hear as ships whistle and back down, turning to fetch more strangers who will not be strangers much longer. A Japanese foreman posts a list of trains like a promise. An American lieutenant needles a clock to the minute because 9:17 departures keep cholera and panic from riding the rails. The bridge to the next set of miracles is visible in pencil lines and timetables. If this harbour can carry tens of thousands a week, imagine the total when every spoke on the wheel turns at once. Could any force repatriate indoctrinated men without turning a platform into a street fight? That was the question when trains rolled out of the north with repatriates shouting the Internationale, waving red flags from windows, and obeying leaders who even tried to block doctors from treating stretcher cases. Families flinched when sons stepped off with the same faces and different eyes, and newspapers asked, "What did they do to our boys?" The American answer was firm and free: no coerced returns, no mob justice, no chaos. MPs formed lanes, translators read rights, medical teams treated the worst cases first, and every person got a route forward they could choose. The scale behind the scene was jaw-dropping. Roughly 1.6 million people flowed out of Soviet-controlled regions alone into a system that never stopped moving the line. A Japanese editor wrote that these men had lost individuality, family feeling, and respect for law, a precise diagnosis of what indoctrination steals. On the platform, a repatriate whispered to an MP, "If you send me back, I disappear," and the MP shook his head once. Not cruel, just certain. The law here belonged to a country that prized the single human being. Nearby, a British former POW pressed a chocolate bar into a child's hand and said, "Welcome back." The quietest counter-propaganda in the world. The enemy's shock was not a set of guns, but a set of rules that made fear yield to schedules, and schedules yield to home. The bridge out of this hard day is the sea itself, because the next act will not be about a single platform, but about fleets and routes that turn a continent's worth of captivity into movement. A U.S. railway officer taps a timetable with a pencil and calls out, "Track 3, 9:17 priority medical," and the whole platform shifts a half step as if the crowd itself understands English numbers. Cars clack together, a conductor's flag snaps, a loudhailer reads instructions in Japanese, and the 917 becomes a moving hospital with hot broth waiting at the far end. The numbers make the scene sing. In May 1946 alone, reception centres scheduled rail for roughly 550,000 arrivals in 3 weeks, the sort of logistics that usually belongs to armies on offence, not ministries of mercy. The line does not blur because rules are the rails. Health checks first, food next, boarding by manifest, family last only so no one is trampled, and everyone rides. American MPs stand easy but unyielding. Japanese police take their cues and hold the ropes. A nurse flicks a thermometer and smiles because the reading is lower than yesterday. At trackside, a Dutch sergeant points at the stamped characters on his voucher and says, "This is the best piece of paper I have ever owned." And no one doubts him. A Japanese station master bows to an American captain and says, "On time." And the captain grins, because being on time is the most American boast there is. The smell is steel dust and miso, coal smoke and soap from a field wash station, where men rinse lice out of shirts that will be burned anyway. The enemy's shock hides in plain sight. Trains that once moved troops now move families, and the machine of war runs even better when the cargo is hope. The bridge to the ledger is ready, because after 1,000 scenes like this, the totals will look ridiculous on paper, and true in every kitchen where someone finally eats at a real table. An old crew chief runs a hand along a B-29's Bombay door and laughs. "You were born to carry, and now you carry life," before he waves the loadmaster to crank the winch. Sacks of flour swing into the belly. Medical chests slide on rollers. A bundle of leaflets goes in last maps. Instructions, the promise that help will land where it is needed. The arithmetic is American and unbelievable. 4,470 tons of supplies, dropped to 158 camps, hospital ships waiting under the horizon, air-sea rescue lines like dotted paths from the Marianas and Okinawa to Honshu. On the water, 188 Japanese ships with roughly 200,000 capacity and 191 U.S. owned ships with about 334,000 more move like a great clock. Every tick is a whistle, every tock a gangway, hitting timber. On land, recovery teams work from rosters to faces. Over 70 teams released, processed, and arranged transport for 32,624 POWs in 3 weeks at the start, a number you can hold in your head and feel in your chest. A New Zealander folds a blanket into a perfect square because doing a small thing well feels like coming back to himself. An American courtman writes a temperature in pencil and tucks the note into a pocket notebook already warped from salt air. The smells braid into a single rope: diesel, iodine, coffee, rope tar, and the sounds run together: boots, gulls, loading hooks, distant engines spooling for the next lift. The enemy's shock is that this is not a burst but a system, not a gift but a plan, and the plan does not depend on one hero but on 100,000 professionals. The bridge to the finale is a thin black line across a white page: totals, dates, cities, and a closing figure so huge and gentle that it reads like a prayer answered by schedules. Could a nation not only end a world war but also carry home an entire population from islands, gulfs, rivers, and rails without breaking? The answer sits in a final tally that feels like fiction and stands like granite. By 31 December 1946, about 5,103,300 Japanese were home under the program. Those who wanted movement received it. The remaining hard cases were either still abroad or in special processing, and the system kept running until every last entry was resolved. Add what fed the machine: 4,470 tons to 158 camps. Third Fleet Hospital care in Tokyo Bay, air-sea rescue chains stitched across the Pacific approaches, reception centres that could push roughly 550,000 onto trains in 3 weeks at peak, and fleets with a combined lift measured in the hundreds of thousands at any one time. The miracle is that these numbers sit beside words like negligible loss of life, quarantine held, and order maintained. Phrases that only make sense when a free people insist that mercy be as organized. Firepower. The feeling on the ground is smaller and better. A father bows to an MP and says, "You gave us back our family," and the MP says, "You're welcome," as if he'd handed over a suitcase and not a future. A British POW writes, "All left this camp on a wall," and underlines it twice. A Japanese nurse teaches a GI to say, "Otsukare-sama," well done, because some words need new homes. The docks quiet, one by one, rope coils stowed, cranes idle, gulls loud in the new silence, and a city gets its streets back, then its schools, then its morning smell of rice steam and fish broth and laundry soap. The enemy's shock becomes a lesson. When kindness moves with the speed of war, indoctrination cannot keep up, and the maps that once carried arrows of invasion now carry arrows of return. The bridge closes the loop with a click you can feel in your wristwatch. America won the war with overwhelming force and won the peace with overwhelming care, turning "Don't send us back to hell" into a promise kept at industrial speed, measured not in divisions destroyed, but in millions delivered alive.